Jen here from Status Quo, and I'm here interviewing Dean Peter Elliott of Christ Church Cathedral. And you said it's Episcopalian, correct?
We called Anglican in Canada, but same brand, yeah.
Okay, and
Hi.
We're here in Vancouver, Canada.
Yay, welcome. Nice to see you guys.
Well, we heard that your church does a lot of outreach for the homeless community and the community in general.
Right.
So can you speak to that a little bit, what your program is?
Yeah, there's been a program here with homeless folks for many, many years. Homelessness is not a new phenomenon in Vancouver, but it has increased over the last few years, owing to increased income disparity. And as you've discovered being here in Vancouver, Vancouver's a very expensive city. It's the most expensive city in Canada. It's also one of the mildest climates in the whole country. So lots of people want to come here, and there's not a lot of work, sadly, especially for unskilled labor. So for many years we had a kind of classic soup kitchen. We served sandwiches, kind of takeout. Volunteers made them in their home. They brought them to church on Sunday. We gave them out through the week. But we became really dissatisfied with that for two reasons. Number one, the numbers were increasing and it seemed like a really inadequate response. And number two, the more social research we did, we found out that one of the big problems in Vancouver was social isolation, especially for people who are poor. They could get kind of locked into very confined situations. So because we did some fundraising and were able to expand our kitchen, we now offer, we call it the Maundy Cafe, M-A-U-N-D-Y. Same word as Maundy Thursday, which is the day before Good Friday. Maundy really means love. So it's a program 5 days a week, hot meals. Monday it's breakfast, Thursday it's dinner, and Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday it's lunch. We're really excited about the deepening in ministry at Christ Church Cathedral, the growth that represents, particularly in the Maundy Cafe, which you have seen, as we seek to feed people, but also to break down the social isolation amongst those who live close to the street in downtown Vancouver. We open for about 90 minutes so that we don't have to have lineups with people scrambling for food, but they can come in. We've sought to break down the barriers between our volunteers who serve the food and our guests so that they volunteers sit with guests and get to know them if the guests want to get to know people. Previously, we had mainly guys, street-identified guys who came here. Now we're seeing much more gender mix, women, men, some couples. On Mondays, when the food bank is also here, sometimes a family.
Okay. And through that, what you just said, you said at first the response was kind of inadequate because more people were coming.
Right.
And overall in Vancouver, homelessness has risen quite a bit over the past decade.
Very sadly, yes.
So, and I know that they just did the count the other night again. Do you expect, I don't know if they've released those numbers.
Haven't released. I did the count. I didn't do it this year. I've done it for about 5 years. It's a fascinating experience.
And just for the audience, the count.
Okay, homeless count. It's kind of like a census for homeless folks. So volunteers go out, wear these big yellow buttons that say City of Vancouver homeless count, and are given an area and invited to go into that area. Like a couple years ago, I was right downtown and part of the area was going into parking garages, going into alleyways, finding where people sleep outside and ask if they have an address, or not, whether they slept outside last night, whether that's been going on for a while. Then a whole range of questions around, do you identify as Indigenous? Do you identify as transgender? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that you can get a kind of profile. It's a snapshot. The numbers have been increasing year over year, sadly, of people who don't have adequate housing.
Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but the Indigenous percentages are far higher for homelessness than is representative of.
Sadly, yes.
Also concerning is the find that 34% of homeless people counted are Indigenous.
These numbers accentuate a need to support some of the most vulnerable in our society. So we are calling on for action by way of an increase of resources.
The numbers are staggering, but not surprising.
A 30% increase is far more than our economy can sustain, and now we know that homelessness is costing us billions of dollars. On the other side of that, hundreds of people are dying on our streets. This is a crisis.
A 30% rise in homelessness since the last count 3 years ago. Vancouver saw a good chunk of that spike.
Both homelessness and in terms of incarceration across Canada, there are proportionally more Indigenous people in jail than white people or non-Indigenous. Yeah.
And overall, with the homelessness rising, and you've increased your response already.
Yeah.
There are resources being poured into this everywhere. But how is it going to stop rising? What are the factors that are causing it to rise in the first place?
Right. Well, I see the homeless issue in Vancouver as a collision of three strands. One is poverty, mental illness. Second is mental illness, and the third is addiction. And frankly, it's a lethal combination of those three things, and it's hard to know which comes first. Are people poor because they're mentally ill? Are they mentally ill because they're addicted? Are they addicted because they're mentally ill? So it's a triple whammy, right, of those three factors, and separating them out is really, really difficult. In my view, something like a guaranteed annual income for all Canadians would be a start. It's not, nothing is going to solve it all, but it would be a start to at least bring people up to economically a level where they can afford to live in Vancouver, making housing more affordable. And actually, Vancouver and the province of British Columbia has been doing some really interesting things with modular housing.
The city has a unique solution to keep hundreds of homeless people out of the cold this winter, and all it takes is an empty lot like this one and some shipping containers. One by one, shipping containers are stacked, but this isn't a port or a loading dock, it's a vacant lot in Vancouver, and those containers are modular homes. Portable, stackable housing for the city's homeless.
They take old shipping containers, stack them, and make basically studio apartments with plumbing and all that sort of stuff. That is beginning to be a response. I think there's been about 4,000 put in the last year. So that would be another piece. The mental illness is epidemic. And finding ways to be sure that that people can be on their meds, if that's going to help. And then addiction is a huge problem. Sometimes, you know, when we hear stories of people who are addicted, it's because they've had an injury. They are no longer on prescription meds. They get street drugs because they're more available, and then they get addicted, and then we end up in the spiral of homelessness again.
Right, and it does seem to be a spiral. Some people are able to rise out for a little while and then fall back in, and the addiction piece, you know, being addicted and then getting clean for a bit, and it's this vicious cycle. But
exactly.
But for it to start in the first place, let's talk more about income inequality, because you drive around Vancouver and there are all these tall buildings, and you know, you can see the global capital everywhere, and there's money being poured into certain types of businesses and certain types of people, and it's leaving out the middle class, or what used to be the middle class.
The middle class is shrinking. The people with lots and lots of money, where capital is increasing, and then the trickle-down effect of all of that is there's more people at the living in poverty. Yeah. You know, there's been a lot of rhetoric around Vancouver about becoming a world-class city. And what that means around the Olympics in 2010, the Winter Olympics here in 2010. And what that means is global capital begins to migrate into places like this and make a very different kind of city than what was. And it is something that's being wrestled with at many different sectors of society. I mean, not only is the homelessness a big issue, but for millennials, for example, who are skilled workers and that sort of stuff, they have to work really hard in high-tech industries. They live because rents and mortgages are so expensive in pretty small environments. And you talked about that's what made you think about all the tall apartment buildings and stuff. We have found that this kind of vertical living doesn't actually build community. Right. And so people are feeling isolated. Their networks, their social networks tend to be digitally oriented, but actual friends, actual people that you see and touch and hang out with are fewer. And so addiction rates go up. Mm-hmm. And then if you get too addicted, and if you have some kind of mental illness, it's not hard to fall through the social safety net and end up on the street.
So your church provides that much needed, I mean, you can't, I'm sure you wish you could wave a magic wand and fix it all, but people need to eat, people need that community. And I think that's a big part of what you keep saying is this.
Social isolation is the big issue. And one of the side benefits of doing this work is the volunteers. So we have a cohort of a bit fewer than 100 people who volunteer to actually make the food and serve the food. We have a staff person who coordinates it all, but the actual work is done. And what we've discovered, and it's a byproduct, an unintentional byproduct, is that the folks who come and serve have formed their own community and are caring for each other and about each other. And that's also helped to break down social isolation. So it kind of works in a number of different ways.
Well, it's so easy for people to pass someone who's homeless on the street and just act like they're not even there, or
right.
They don't even see them. So having that opportunity to be part of a community, they're people.
Yeah, and the people you pass on the street, and you've been around Vancouver long enough to know now that you pass lots of folks. Yes. If they're actually seeking money, some of those folks do fairly well, but the invisible folks, those are folks who have an enterprising spirit, let me put it that way. They're kind of the entrepreneurs of the street community. And bless their hearts, they're out there, it's hard work, they do it. The people I get very concerned about are the ones who can't even get out from the shelter, or they're scared to interact with somebody like me who's seen as an authority figure. And they're kind of lost in their own world of addiction and sadness. And then, you know, one of the things we want to look at here is to begin to record the names of homeless people who die on the streets. Mm. So there's at least a place that remembers, eh?
Right, yeah, that sounds extremely important.
Yeah.
Kind of switching gears a little
Sure.
bit and going back to the global capital, what would happen if Amazon came to your city? Now, you've been down to Seattle and looked at the homelessness problem there and the impact Amazon's had, so what would happen?
Well, they're already here. Amazon's already here. They've got a fairly big operation. They're going to increase their operation here. There's, you know, in all these things, there's an upside and a downside. There's jobs, and that's very attractive to the business community. But then there's also the loss of jobs by the numbers of retail operations that are no longer sustainable because it's so much easier, more convenient for the middle class to go online and get it, and get whatever product they're looking for. I mean, Amazon is just kind of, in my view, has just kind of exploited a consumer society, right? Yeah. Where your success is measured by the kind of stuff you have, and the quicker you can get stuff and the easier from a middle class perspective, the better. Like, oh wow, isn't that amazing? Most folks don't say, so what's the cost of that long term, right? And why is this organization raking in massive profits while, you know, bookstores are just declining? There's a couple of them in town now. There used to be lots and lots of good bookstores. So they are wanting to increase their operation here. It's going to increase this change that the digital world has brought to this collision of the digital world and the consumer world, right? And boom, now they're together.
Right. Well, so do you think that, using your word collision, the collision of the foreign money that's already coming in, and then Amazon growing and growing,
right?
There's going to be lots of money in Vancouver. There already is a lot of money in Vancouver, a lot from what I hear. Emphasis on that. Do you think it's going to make the problem worse and worse as Amazon grows and as more foreign money comes in? Unless there are counteracting steps to, I mean, I'm a big advocate of, from a political point of view, of a guaranteed annual income. It seems to me it's kind of the next step beyond socialized medicine, which we already have. Anybody can show up at an emergency room at a doctor's office, show citizenship, and you get health care is free. As it should be in the States, too. Right, right. Well, you know. Even from a very conservative analysis, when I've read it, moving government support for individuals who are falling through the social safety net, it would be less expensive to guarantee a base income for every Canadian. It would make money more available to more people and allow them to find some kind of housing that restores their dignity. So I think the first thing for people to do is to learn about the causes of homelessness. Because some of the attitudes that the middle class and other folks have is, you know, why don't these people just help themselves? Well, that's easy to say. The fact of the matter is that the system is stacked against them actually being able to help themselves, right? And you've got to have that kind of social analysis before you should start acting. So I think media outlets like yours that take a progressive view, that are asking the non-corporate questions or asking the questions about what is the impact of globalized capital, and is a good place for people to start. And then there's lots of community organizations in Vancouver and most other cities across North America where I know that community workers would be happy if someone called and said, you know, it's like you did, tell us about what you're doing and why you're doing it, right. And then maybe get involved in some way. And the third thing, I think, is middle class people who are earning a decent living, affording their lives for the most part, they can give money. You know, the rates of charitable giving, particularly in Canada, are ridiculously low. And it's a way that you can participate, and it's a way you can make a difference. I'm a priest. It's good for your soul to give, right? Whether it's your time, volunteer time, or some money, it can really make a difference. Very good. Thank you so much for your time. Nice to meet you, Jen. Nice to meet you.
Out front tonight, chaos at the White House. President Trump's deputy chief of staff, his communications director, is
just because of their connection to President Trump. And I know you've been saying...
We learned recently that Donald Trump threatened to sue his former schools if...
Tired of hearing about Trump 24/7? Become a member at statuscool.com for only $10 a month. Click the notification. With your help, we can start the media revolution.
And before Bernie went on stage, I spoke with his supporters online here, and you really get that feeling from